Well, as far as I can tell, we probably have, I know Leonard has readers from all over the world. In fact, he has readers from the United States and Canada and Mexico, Panama, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru, Republic Dominican, Cuba, Caribbean, Greenland, El Salvador, too, Puerto Rico, Colombia, Venezuela, Honduras, Guyana, and still Guatemala, Bolivia, then Argentina, and Ecuador, Chile, Brazil, Costa Rica, Belize, Nicaragua, Bermuda, Bahamas, Tobago, San Juan, Paraguay, Uruguay, Suriname, and French Guiana, Barbados, and Guam, and probably even Pasadena.
Thank you, Rob.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this evening's event. My name is Kim Sutton, and I'm the host of tonight's event. Before we begin, I want to encourage you all to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting pals.com. One of our many upcoming events we're looking forward to is Tiffany D. Cross in conversation with Ellie Mistel about Cross's new book, Say It Louder, Black Voters, White Narratives, and Saving Our Democracy. That's next Friday, the 18th. As well, please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Tonight, we are honored to welcome Leonard Mlodinow, and Rob Paulsen. Leonard received his PhD in theoretical physics from the University of California at Berkeley, was an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow at the Max Planck Institute, and was on the faculty of California Institute of Technology. His previous books include the bestsellers The Grand Design and A Briefer History of Time, both with Stephen Hawking, Subliminal, which was the winner of the Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award, and War of the Worldviews with Deepak Chopra, as well as Elastic, Euclid's Window, Feynman's Rainbow, and The Upright Thinkers. Mlodinow joins us this evening for a conversation about his new book, Stephen Hawking, A Memoir of Friendship and Physics. One of the most influential physicists of our time, Stephen Hawking touched the lives of millions. Recalling his nearly 2 decades as Hawking's collaborator and friend, Mlodinow brings this complex man into focus in a unique and deeply personal portrayal. He puts us in the room as Hawking indulges his passion for wine and curry, shares his feelings on love, death, and disability, and grapples with the deep questions of philosophy and physics. Mlodinow's deeply affecting account of friendship teaches us not just about the nature and practice of physics, but also about life and the human capacity to overcome daunting obstacles. Mlodinow is joined in conversation today by voice actor Rob Paulsen. Paulsen has been a voice actor for nearly 3 decades and is the voice of Pinky from Pinky and the Brain, Raphael and Donatello from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Carl Wheezer from Jimmy Neutron. He has won an Emmy Award, a Peabody Award, and 3 Annie Awards for his voice acting. His memoir, Voice Lessons, was released last year. Ironically, a man who uses his voice for work found himself with throat cancer, but he has thankfully recovered and is now the spokesperson for the HNCA's Oral Head and Neck Cancer Awareness Program. This evening's event will include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. If someone has typed a question that you'd like to know the answer to, please upvote the particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please consider supporting Leonard and Pals by purchasing a copy of his new book. A link to purchase the books will be shared in a chat in a couple of minutes. Leonard, Rob, it is such a pleasure to welcome you both. Thank you for joining us.
Great pleasure. Thank you. Well said. And as an armchair physicist who somehow makes his living doing essentially what got me in trouble in high school, I can tell you that this is a marvelous book. And so thank you very much, Leonard, for letting me, for rather lowering your standards with respect to speakers. Thanks for having me on board.
Thanks for doing this, Rob.
My
Adding
great
a little
pleasure.
humor to the discussion.
Not at all. My pleasure.
It
And
won't
by
be
the
just
way,
the usual dry physics.
yeah, well, and full disclosure, your fabulous, really handsome, genius child, Nikolai, helps me with my own social media marketing. And the apple didn't fall far from the tree, my friend. He's a delightful, smart, bright young man, and I'm very grateful to have him in my life. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. And just in case there are folks who are watching who are transfixed by, all of the stuff surrounding us, but may not be as aware of Stephen Hawking as others, what could you briefly explain to us what Stephen Hawking's place is in physics and the history of physics?
Well, Stephen went to school in the 60s. So he went to Oxford first, and then he went to graduate school at Cambridge. And that's where he fell ill at the end of his undergraduate and beginning of his graduate school. And he had a revelation after that when he fell ill, which was that before that, he was kind of a goof off. And due to his illness, he found a purpose in life, some kind of meaning in his life. And he decided that he wanted to dedicate his last years to answering some fundamental questions about our existence, which was basically, why are we here? How do we get here? How did the universe get here? And why is it the way it is? And those were not questions that people were asking very much in the 1960s.
No.
And the systems that they may have been asking that, in Haight-Ashbury or in Berkeley, but they weren't asking that. They
some
weren't asking
chemical
that in the
inducement,
department,
yeah.
right? And what the areas that he chose to study to address those questions were, the first one is very obvious. It's the early universe, the beginning of the universe. And the other is black holes, which is a little bit less obvious. But not many people were interested in those areas either back then, because people felt that you couldn't ever observe them. Physics is an experimental or observational science. Mm-hmm. And people thought, well, you can't look back to the beginning of the universe and we're never going to find a black hole. So why study them theoretically? Now, it turned out as a footnote that as technology advanced, we can study those things. We can, there's a very famous picture from just a few years ago of a black hole.
Right.
But back then it seemed like we'd never get there. So there were some people who were working on it, but in the iconic physicist Richard Feynman's description, he said they were a bunch of dopes, and that just going to a conference on that made his blood boil because he was so frustrated with the quality of the research. So it was into that kind of area that Stephen walked in. Right. And Stephen, with his yearning to answer these existential questions, started studying, and in the 1960s made great progress in understanding both the early universe and black holes through Einstein's general theory of relativity. And it's important to note here that he did not apply quantum theory to it then. So it just took Einstein's theory of gravity, and he made great progress in understanding the early universe and black holes. Then later in the 1970s, he started to apply quantum theory and made some very exciting advances doing that. He realized that you can't ignore quantum theory in those areas, as people had been doing, and he found new results. So the sum total of all this and his work after that was that he took this field of cosmology, of the study of the early universe, and black holes, which is related to that, and he took it from a backwater nothing field and made it one of the hottest fields in physics. Right. And in his combining of general relativity and quantum theory, he was a pioneer in really what is probably the holy, in looking for what is the holy grail of physics, which is uniting the theory of gravity with quantum theory. So by doing that, he was a pioneer and made great steps in showing how we can think about that. We still haven't done it. And he lifted the study of black holes and cosmology to make it not only respectable, but very popular.
Oh, my goodness.
Sorry to start with such a long answer, but.
Well, no. In fact, you're right. And obviously, we now know that Stephen had a terrific movie made about him, in which I think Eddie Redmayne won an Oscar for that performance. But my suspicion, having grown up, the physicist, when I grew up, was like most Albert Einstein. Do you have a feeling that was Stephen essentially thought of as like the next physicist rock star? Was he another Einstein?
He was not another Einstein, and he would just kind of roll his eyes and smile when people said that, because he knew that it was, and who wants to have that bar to live up to either? It's a pretty high bar. Right. To tell you the truth, even Einstein, for most of his career, wasn't an Einstein. Einstein had most of his major discoveries, and that's the first 15 years of his career.
Right.
Stephen was a leader, one of the best of his generation, one of the leading physicists of his generation, and I don't think we should be trying to quantify that, but
Right.
I think that's a good, solid description of him, and one that he would have agreed with.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, Einstein came up with his energy equals mass times the speed of light squared theory at 25. Is that
Yeah, in
correct?
1905. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But that was a consequence. It's interesting. People misunderstand how physics works. You don't sit there and get a brilliant idea that E is equal to mc squared,
Mm-hmm.
and then tell other people, and they say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." He developed this theory we call special relativity, and that was based on certain principles that in particular, the speed of light is constant, because that was something that was implied by Maxwell's work in the 1860s. And then investigating that and building a theory of adjusting Newton's laws to take that into account, he developed his theory of special relativity. And one of the consequences, or one of the things he discovered as he's writing out that theory, is, oh my God, this theory says E equals mc squared.
Right.
So,
and it became sort of a metaphor for all the cool stuff. I still remember we're the same age, and the opening to the Twilight Zone,
right.
had that E equals mc squared, and it became,
It was good back in the 1920s, wasn't it, Rob?
Yeah, that's right. Well, people don't know this, but I was the entertainment at the Last Supper. I mean, I've been around. I was Shecky of Arimathea, and Jesus, what a party. Anyway, I know this because
that's all I have to say.
Well, you were a busboy.
I taught him a thing or two.
That's right. We have figured out the space-time continuum, ladies and gentlemen. I know this because I read the book. How did you first meet Stephen?
Well, he read my first two books, and he was,
wow.
One was called Euclid's Window. It was about curved space and what it really means, and how over the centuries the idea developed, how it's used in physics. And that was a very actually important topic to Stephen in his research. And then he read my second book, which was Feynman's Rainbow, Search for Beauty in Physics and in Life. And that was a memoir about my relationship with that great physicist Feynman that I've mentioned while I was at Caltech in my 20s. And he liked those books. And he was looking for someone to write with I think he wanted someone with a sense of humor, and someone whose writing he liked. And I think most of all, he wanted someone who understood physics. And I guess he decided that I fit that. So one day I just get a call from my agent. Stephen Hawking's office called. And this might not happen. This is a bizarre question, but would you like to write a book with him? And yeah.
Are you kidding me? Yeah. Oh my God. Well, and I can say again, folks, having read the book, I make my living in the funny business. You do have an excellent sense of humor, Leonard, and it comes across beautifully in the book. It truly does. It's you mentioned how the sort of dryness of physics, but you have found a way, and clearly Mr. Hawking had a wicked sense of humor too, and you're able to translate that to the reader. It really is. In fact, I know that you began working with Stephen, when he was sort of in his full-blown amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, his Lou Gehrig's disease. What surprised you witnessing firsthand how Stephen worked? Was there anything that made you go, wow, this is pretty remarkable, in addition to the fact that he was doing what he was doing in his physical state? Well,
it's really fascinating. And again, I hope I don't get too long with this discussion, with this answer, but
it's your book, man.
Physics, most of physics can be looked at in two different ways. One is algebraically with equations, we call it, or analysis, mathematical term. And the other way is geometrically. And you have to understand both really, but most of the work that most people do is done using equations. Stephen obviously can't do that. He can't write couldn't write equations, couldn't move. And he did have an amazing memory where he could do some derivations that way, just like a grandmaster in chess can play 20 people blindfolded and not triple for his feet, but he would remember each game and what to do. And I always was in awe of that, because I can't play one good game of chess without a blindfold.
Yeah.
So I'm going, well, these guys have something. So he did have that ability, but it was still difficult for him, and it put him at a disadvantage as opposed to other physicists who could write down their equations. So what he did, which really surprised me, I didn't learn for a while, but he learned a new way of doing physics, and he did the geometric approach rather than the equations approach, and he worked out his own language of geometry to treat the problems that he was treating, and so that he could solve problems and get ideas and analyze situations of interest to him in his head using pictures. So in his head, there's beams of light beams and particle beams and black holes and all this, and he's analyzing how they look and how they're interacting using pictures or using geometric relationships in his head. And his friend and famous Nobel Prize winner Kip Thorne said that was Stephen's superpower.
Wow. Because
he could, by doing that, not only was he avoiding his handicap of not writing equations, but he actually had a new angle to look at things that other physicists didn't have, that allowed him to make discoveries and have insights that other physicists didn't, because they didn't have that approach.
Yeah.
So he managed to take the disability and turn it into an advantage.
You know, that's interesting, because in the book you cite how we hear of people who are sightless, who find a way to really, enhance their sense of hearing or smell or taste or whatever. Do you feel ultimately that, or maybe even Stephen may have suggested this, do you feel ultimately that his debilitating illness ended up being something that actually helped him in his discipline?
Well, he told me that it did. He told me that, well, first, as I mentioned, it gave him meaning and purpose, which is,
right.
I think, without that driving him.
For anybody, yeah.
For anybody. I mean, physics is a very hard subject. You have to put in very long hours, all alone, scrunched over your pad of paper. Yeah. It's burning. California's burning right now, but so is Oregon, I think. But on a normal time, when it's not, you want to go outside and take a walk, but instead you stay home. You want to see your family or your friends, but now you're working 12 hours a day for months every day, just to finish your work. And so the first thing that it did for him was it gave him that drive to answer these questions. So that was like giving him the meaning and giving him the focus, about eliminating distractions from him and allowing him to focus so long and so hard on these problems, he said, was a big advantage to him, even apart from his geometric thinking. And
you being
he wouldn't have done as well if he hadn't had the disability.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially you being a celebrated and prolific author. I've written one book, and I had a gentleman help me. Do physicists go through what a layperson would call writer's block? That is to say, when you're working on a theory, or you're working on something, you're postulating, you have your own premises that you're working on. Do you find that you actually can go through writer's block too? As you mentioned, you're alone. Are there points at which you say, I'm stuck?
So that's why I wrote the book, really. I mean, not just for physics, but for Stephen's personal life. I don't like the mythology around physics and science, or the mythology around Stephen, the idealization of him as a person.
Yeah.
And I wrote the book to really expose how we do physics, but also how he lived his life every day. What is his everyday life like? And yes, physicists don't just, like in the movies you mentioned, look into a fireplace and the answer comes.
Boom. Yeah.
Yeah. But if it was, then I guess
we'd all be physicists.
We'd all be having these low-paid physics jobs, coming up with great theories, and it would be a dime a dozen. But it's very difficult. And yes, I mean, Richard Feynman, for example, had very long periods of non-productivity where he had no ideas, and he would get depressed, and he thought that the teaching saved him, because in those times he still was teaching his courses, and he would concentrate on teaching, and that would fulfill him and take up his time, because he's waiting for some idea to come. Yeah. So this happens both while you're doing a problem and between problems. So, between problems, you're sitting there and going, okay, I just wrote, a paper or maybe 10 papers, and maybe on one topic or 3 topics, I had a lot of ideas, but I've run out of ideas, or, I've done all the papers on that topic. What should I work on now? Sometimes you have something in the back of your head that you are curious about and you just move on, and sometimes you don't.
Right.
So as a physicist, you're sitting there like a writer who doesn't know what book to write next.
Right.
And while you're doing your problem, you also have minor crises like that too, because you're going, okay, I need to get from here to there to answer the question that I'm trying to answer in this research. Right. And you go, I think this is how you figure it out. Nope. I think this is how you figure it out. Nope. And just keep butting your head against walls. You
Right.
might work for a day or a month in some promising direction, and it doesn't work. And then you finally get to a point sometimes where you have no more ideas. So you've gotten to a certain point in your research, you know what you want to show, or you have an idea where you want to go with it, but the math isn't working out. So yeah, it's full of very frustrating and difficult times. And Stephen spent, he drove his wives crazy, because he would, when he hit that wall, he would turn Wagner up. He liked the Wagner opera, really, really super loud, so it annoyed everybody in the house, but it would blot out the rest of the world for him. And he would spend day after day after day after day just focused on getting past that. So
good gracious. Well, and by the way, the thing that it sounds like that was part of your mission, was to, for lack of a better term, humanize Stephen, or make him relatable. And you absolutely nailed that. There were certainly things that no one would know, having not been close to him, but you utterly de-Hollywooded and made him, somebody that you became your friend, often with the usual frustrations that people have with other people. Was there a point at which your work with Stephen, the fact that he was wheelchair bound and was nonverbal, that was like not a big deal? It was basically, oh, Stephen's got a different shirt on today, that it really was not an issue. You got used to it.
That's a good question, Rob. And there's so much in that development in the book, but yeah, the answer is yes. When I first got there to work with him to Cambridge, to his office, I felt bad for him, because you could see what discomfort he was in.
Oh man.
Not necessarily that he was in this discomfort, but that he should have been.
Yeah.
He had things happening to him, like a bead of sweat going down his forehead that he had to wipe away. Remember that story? And
I do. And let me interrupt for just a moment. I do. And that is one of the seminal moments of the book, because it is the sort of thing that we can all relate to immediately. And you just take your hand and you go like this. But the way in which you describe your empathy, your like, oh my God, that would drive me nuts. Or if my nose was itching, it doesn't matter if you're Muhammad Ali, Stephen Hawking, Leonard Mlodinow, or Rob Paulsen, or a guy on the street. The things we all take for granted, that all of a sudden was a central focus of this world-class physicist. The way you described that was really remarkable and very, very empathic.
Well, thank you. And I couldn't understand how he could go through his days without being able to do that. And his carers maybe would notice, or maybe not. But so at first I felt sorry for him a lot. But then as I got to know him better, I realized, no, don't feel sorry for him. He actually was quite inspiring to me by the way he handled those things. He really changed the way he thought, so that it's not that he sees that he has the sweat dripping down, or the itch, or at bedtime where he's sleeping and he wants to turn, but he can't turn. He has to wait for them to just turn him, and all these other obstacles and tortures that the rest of us would experience in that condition. He learned not to remedy them, but not to mind them. He took control of his mind, his feelings, and he learned not to let them bother him. That's just amazing. That's like, the Greeks had philosophy called Stoic philosophy, which is that happiness, true happiness and lasting happiness comes from only within you. It's not from the things you accomplish, from the material goods, or from any other person. All that can be taken away, and it's subject to many things beyond your control. But what you have control over is self-satisfaction and how you feel about yourself and and your own mind. And Stephen really did that. And once I realized that that was what's going on, I didn't feel sorry for him anymore. And yes, he was a person with a handicap, but he was also kind of a person with reddish hair and blue eyes, and another trait of his. And we interacted. I interacted with him without even thinking about his handicap.
Well, that's what I was mentioning earlier, is that you really do describe his utter humanity. And you touch on something quite important with respects to Stephen, and I've experienced in my own life with my throat cancer a few years ago, and that is the ability to really focus on living in the moment, to really understand that, wow, this is a pretty tenuous little fragile line on which we walk. And it doesn't have to be Lou Gehrig's disease, but often it requires something to kind of jumpstart your humanity. And you think, wow, all of a sudden I know what's important. And he, according to you and your description, was the embodiment of that he literally made lemonade every damn day. It was remarkable.
It really was. And that, I think, was one of the great lessons that I tried to impart. And I admired him very much for that.
In fact, in that light, how would you describe his personality in general? Is there
an amazing thing? So because he could do that, because he would not be beaten down by all these, what would for most of us be physical issues, he was able. He was an optimistic person. He had a great sense of humor. He had a great energy, joie de vivre. When we were going to go punting on the cam one afternoon, one of his carers said, "Hey, Leonard, do some tourist stuff. Let's go punting down which to those of you who don't have the cam in your own town."
Please describe what punting on the cam means.
Yeah, so that's a flat boat. To me, it's like a recipe for tipping over. It's a very flat, shallow boat. And someone stands in the back on a platform, kind of like in Venice, I guess, but this is standing up on a platform.
And the boat is called a punt.
Pushing the pole into the bottom of the river to propel you along. And when we went to do that, first he has to get packed. So he showed with his face that he wanted to join us. So we said, sure, come along. And, you have to, packing him up takes 10 minutes. Getting him into the van, because he had a specially designed van, and the wheelchair had to go up a ramp and had to be turned in a certain way, which was difficult. He had to be, his wheelchair had to be bolted down, so if there was any, rough ride, he wouldn't go flying. And had all be reversed at the other end. He had to be carried down, 20, 30 uneven stone steps to the boat. And then on the boat, they had one carer, so if he gets detached from his machine, he can't communicate from his computer, from his wheelchair, because you're not taking the wheelchair on the boat. And one of them takes his head, one takes his feet, and they carry him down these stairs. His head is moving.
My goodness.
And all I'm thinking of is neck ache. And then they climb in. I'm thinking that's precarious. They're gonna, could easily slip. If he goes into the river, he can't obviously swim. He's just gonna drown. And then I'm stepping in, and I lose my balance, almost fall off. And I'm thinking, oh my God.
All in one boat, correct?
I must be scaring him into the boat. I must be scaring him. And I look down and he's laughing at me. He's the one who got in easy. And then when they're moving, he had to have he could go with his eyes left or right, and they would turn his head to look at whatever he wanted to look at.
Yeah.
With all those, difficulties, and he loved it, and he did everyday things like that. He didn't let his disability stop him.
Well, and you also, as I recall, you actually helped, like everybody else, they're punting on the cam and they want to have strawberries and champagne. And so you help him have a little bit of zippity-doo-dah in his cam punting.
I think I had a glass for every tablespoon he had, but that's okay. I figured at the end they could just carry me up after him.
That's right. I don't know how relative this theory is, but I feel like $100 million. I totally get that.
Hey, Rob, I don't know. Are you pondering what I'm pondering?
Well, I think so, Leonard. I think I am. But recently I was sitting outside on my plank, which I've named Max. And I thought to myself, Leonard, why does Niels bore you? Now that's
I
pretty
like
good.
it. Thank you.
Not bad. For Pinky answering a non-sequitorial physics
Yeah.
response. Thank you, my
I thought you were going to break into song again with that.
Well, I could say it's a great big universe and we're all really puny. We're just tiny little specks about the size of Mickey Rooney. But I don't know if exactly that's the road you want to go down. But man, you poke me with a stick and you'll be sorry.
I already am, Rob.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Your book obviously is full of just glorious stories about you being with Stephen, and as you just described, his joie de vivre. Are there any particular, without giving too much away, is there a particular moment or two that you feel were just sort of encapsulated the whole experience, if that's even possible?
Oh, wow. Well, there are so many stories and they're in different directions, but I guess I would talk about one time where I had a near-death experience. I was,
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I had a internal bleeding in my intestines that they couldn't find the source of. And anyway, when I get back to Cambridge the next time, that got over that. And he and I were having dinner. After dinner one night, we started talking. And I was, he knew that that had happened to me. We started talking about it. We talked about all his near-death experiences, which were at least, I would say, at least one a year.
I was going to say numerous.
Hmm?
Numerous.
One of the problems with his disease is you have difficulty breathing eventually as it creeps up your body. Yeah. And so he was, because of that weak lungs, he was subject to a lot of lung infections, and he had a stoma. He breathed through his chest. So I think that may have also exacerbated it. So every year or even more often, he would end up in the hospital with a lung infection. And it seemed to me several times his family or his carers were thinking he might not pull through. So he had gone through this many times. So we were commiserating a little bit. And I know that he said once at the end of one of those, he was talking about it. He said, yeah, that's tough, but then back to physics.
Yeah.
And my son, Nikolai, who we mentioned earlier, he used to always say in high school that basketball is life. And so I said to Stephen, told him that, and I said, but to you, physics is life, isn't it? And then he gives me his no and he starts typing. And then what comes out is he says, love is life.
Yep.
And I thought that was really fitting for the person who is the most famous physicist in the world, who I've been working with all this time and getting to know. That's his humanity coming out. He's not in his essence, he's not a physicist. He's a person who loves other people and loves life.
Yeah. And I think when I was reading your book, we discussed, I told you how much that really impacted me. The fact that he wrote, it's love, the meaning of life, or the most, and it really was, it was profound. And there are many instances like that in the book, folks, where you kind of stop and reread it. And in the context of who Leonard is talking about, it really is impactful. In that light, was Stephen an atheist? Was he an agnostic? Was he a sort of semi-deist, or?
No, he was an atheist. He didn't like to talk about that in public. He was very sensitive. He very much did not want to insult anybody or argue against God. People sometimes interpret his books, our book, The Grand Design, for example, as an argument against God. What we say in that book is that God was not necessary to create the universe. One of the arguments for God is often that there needed to be some supernatural thing that started off the universe. But in Stephen's theory, he showed that the universe could start from nothing. And that was at the essence of that book, The Grand Design. But we did not say there's no God. We're just saying this could have happened. You don't need to have a God. We're not arguing against God or pretending that we found evidence against God. And and in fact, I think he was a very spiritual person. There's a lot of episodes in the book, I think, that illustrate that. And I think also that he went to church. He went to church with Elaine, I know.
Yeah. Who, by the way, who was a pretty religious woman? Is that
well,
correct?
All three of them, both of his wives and his girlfriend at the end were all religious people, religious women, and he would go to church. And girlfriend saw he was crying. Sure, so much music that they were playing, and so so he was not. He was not. I think religion and science don't have to, be like that with each other.
No, in fact, you cite in the book, you kind of just touched on it briefly about the kind of heat you took when the Grand Design was released. And I believe you got a phone call from his secretary who said, "Oh my God, you got to help us. The folks are freaking out. You've written a book and you disparage God," and you kind of had to do a little bit of housekeeping.
Well, yeah, the book was. I guess I knew the book was coming out that day, and it was in England. I was here. I took my daughter to school, and it was 8 a.m. here or something. And Judith, his assistant, calls me, and very frantic. Leonard, have you read the Times? I go, yeah, I read it. The New York Times. I read that every day, even though I'm in California. But I read that every day. She says, the New York Times, the London Times.
Yeah.
How many people? There's 3 of them somewhere on the West Side who read the London Times. I don't read the London Times. No, why would you think that? Boy, you must Google this. I mean, it's an explosion. It's I don't know. It's an emergency. We can't handle it. Every reporters are all calling us. We can't handle us. You have to do all the interviews. Go read it and let's talk. I ended up doing 97 interviews, by the way, based on that. The London Times headline was Hawking, First of all, that's already a mistake because it's Hawking and Mlodinow, I have to say. But given that my name is really long, I guess what they did was they picked the shorter of the 2 names to put up there. So they said, Hawking, God did not create the universe.
Oh boy.
I said, Judith, that's not what we said. It doesn't matter what we said. This is what they say we said. I don't think they even read it. And a lot of the people who were very upset, I don't think they read it either. But we were condemned by the Bishop of England, and I don't know, from all different quarters, from different countries. But on the other hand, they got people to know about the book, and the book was the #1 seller because it was very provocative. But and if you actually read the book, you would see we weren't saying that. No. But it was a very compelling and interesting book. So that was actually a very stressful time. I mean, they would call me and, can you drive out to Burbank for 10 minutes on CNN? And then can you go to that studio, Fox, I was on Fox News wants to interview you. Yeah. And some of them are polite, some of them are attacking you for and I was saying, this is a physics book. It's a physics book. No one gets this excited about a physics book.
Yeah.
And my mother would say, what could be so upsetting in a physics book?
Isn't that great? Like I wake up in the morning, find out how I can piss off God, right?
Yeah, I don't know. We know they were talking about, I turned on ESPN, they're talking about the book.
Yeah.
Someone sent me a copy of Men's Health magazine. I don't know.
Hey man,
there was nothing about push-ups in the book. I don't know what that was about, but it was talked about everywhere. So
you expanded your readership. Why not?
Yeah, we did. People got to know. At least they heard about the book. So
sure.
But it was all based on a misconstrual.
Well, before we move on to the questions of the folks kind enough to watch us, what did your work with Stephen teach you about yourself? That's pretty much the question. What did you learn about yourself vis-a-vis Stephen?
Well, it gave me perspective. I mean, I've so many times since then look what he had to go through, and you're whining about a headache, or you smashed your car, or whatever it is. And I go, on a scale from 1 to I can't even move, this is more like a 1. Yeah. So don't get upset about it. Whereas I used to go, this is a 9. Are you kidding? My brand new car got smashed up. This is worse than anybody, right? And now I go, no, I can still walk away from it, right? So I mean that plus that's what I learned about myself, that I take things too seriously, and I shouldn't. But I also learned, I think some of it rubbed off, this ability to make it not matter to you. So the perspective is one thing, but the taking charge of your own thoughts and having it not matter to you is I think, even more important.
Yeah, I think so too. It really truly is a marvelous book that you don't have to be, dude, I make my living doing cartoon voices, and it was utterly relatable, utterly readable, and really a total joy. And there are aspects in the book that we can all apply to ourselves. Yeah, you've done good, kid. It really is a hell of a book.
Yeah.
Are we ready to go? I mean, it's already 20 minutes to 6 in the Pacific, and I want to make sure that we have everybody. Can we go ahead and do that now?
Question?
Yes. Is that okay with you?
It's good with me.
Great. Let's try. Let me go to the Q&A thing here. Let's make sure I don't push the wrong button and set off an international event. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one from anonymous attendee, one of my favorite people, who says, were you ever intimidated by Mr. Hawking? I guess right off the bat, when you got the phone call, after you initially settled down and go, holy shit, did you then go like, oh my God, then, oh my God, you know?
Well, when I first met him, yeah, you know, and even in the early meetings, not just the first time, of course, because you walk in and he's an icon and he's so brilliant, and I'm not, so I'm like, oh, you know, that's
we'll be the judge of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't judge me about judge me by what he does.
That's right. Fair enough.
And
but
he calls around with me, so I must be brilliant too, right?
Oh, well, that goes without saying.
I have to say, though, he did not suffer fools well. Yeah.
Were you concerned in that vein? Were you concerned that when you started working with him, that you were going to say something that he would perceive as stupid or silly, or he called you, and I get that, but were you going, oh Jesus, don't screw this up, Leonard?
No, I think it's not that I had that worry before I asked anything, but at times after I asked something,
yeah,
I was kicking myself for saying something that he might find stupid. Right? Yeah.
Well, and
sometimes when I didn't understand what he was telling, because we were looking at his current work, and it was pretty complicated, and I'm reading his papers. You know, I'm asking him a question, and I think, oh, maybe I should have known the answer to that question. But one time though, okay, I was right. So we would work together there, and then we would split up, and when we were at the end of our working together in Cambridge, we would assign each other things to do. So he would write this section, I would write these sections, and we'd email them to each other, supposed to read them before we next meet.
Right.
Meetings were almost always in Cambridge, but once a year he spent a month at Caltech, where I was on the faculty, so I could see him there too. And so we went back and forth with each other. So I go in, you know, one time I'm writing this passage, but I don't get what his research, I just don't get this particular point. So he was doing that work with a guy named Jim Hartle up in UC Santa Barbara. So I drove up to Santa Barbara and spent a whole day, and Jim explained to me what they were doing in this element of it. I go back and write it all up. And I go back to Cambridge next time to see him, and you know, we're reviewing that part that I had written, and he's going, no, this is wrong. No, this is wrong. It's this way. So, and I'm going, what? I'm sure I understood it, you know, and I don't know what to say. And I'm actually, at one point, I'm looking at my old notes about exactly, you know, what he said, what Jim said. I had taken. I'm going. Finally, I said, look, this is my notes from talking to Jim. I showed him, you know, look. This is how it works, not what you're saying. It's this. And then he goes to me, oh, no, that's what we used to think, but we changed our mind.
Wow.
No one told me, and I wrote like 5 pages about it.
We changed our mind.
We changed our mind, yeah. But it was working out, because the research he was doing was a work in progress, and so it happens.
But he didn't tell you.
An email to me would have been nice, saying, by the way, I know you're working on explaining this, but it's upside down. You know? Well,
in fact, in the book, what I love about your relationship with Stephen is you are unafraid to discuss in the book your frustration with, you know, certainly the most famous physicist of my time as a layperson, you talked about your frustration about, hey man, if you're going to do this, let's do it. I'm paraphrasing, but you were writing together, and he essentially dropped the ball, and you called him on it.
Yeah.
That's pretty ballsy, man.
Well, I was, I was pretty frustrated.
Yeah.
I won't give anything away, but
No. I'm sorry. I'm talking too much.
That's fine. No, I'm just saying. I won't tell the whole story. But I was pretty frustrated at that point, and even in little things where there were many frustrations working with him. How people would just walk into his office, and you'd be in the middle of something, and suddenly this guy's talking to them for an hour. They'd say, "Oh yeah, this will just take a minute."
Yeah.
A minute is a euphemism in Cambridge for an hour.
I would imagine that is a literal
No,
brief history
actually,
of time.
what it meant was this won't take just a minute. At first, I was naive. And, oh, yeah, come on in for a minute. It didn't actually matter whether I said. They would say, "Do you mind?" And if I said I did mind, they would just ignore that and just come in. And Stephen was fine with. I mean, I don't know how I got anything done because he was just letting himself get interrupted.
Yeah.
I mean, not that he could raise his hand and say, "Go away." You know what he would do? He would sometimes, if he didn't want to talk to them, he would just ignore them. So if he really was, like when we were working together and didn't want to be interrupted, they would come in. "Hey, Leonard, do you mind if we, we work?" I don't know. We're kind of busy, but yeah, I don't know. Stephen, whatever I would say, they would just keep coming. They would come in. They would stand right in front of him and start asking their question. And he would not answer. He would just ignore them and keep talking to me. And he would, his face would be pointed at me. He'd kind of look at me like that. He would, his eyes would not go to the person.
Yeah.
He would look at me. I'd say something. He'd answer me. The guy would just be standing there and his sentences floating in the air. And eventually he'd get tired and walk away.
Wow. Well,
That's
my
how
wife,
we roll, man.
yeah, if it works for that guy. And actually, this is a great question. My friend Cecilia White, who is I believe, a chemistry student. I'm not sure, Cecilia, forgive me, but she said, did you ever collaborate on any physics problems together? Did he inspire you to want to learn about certain areas of physics? In other words,
there was one. There was one. I was interested in why we remember. Okay, well, I'll give you a little preamble. Sorry.
Go ahead.
The equations of physics are reversible. So you take data on the current state of a system, where everything is and how it's moving, a snapshot, and then the laws of physics tell you how that develops, and they can go either way, forward or backward in time. There's no difference, okay?
Right.
And so now, obviously, if you see a film, you can tell the difference. Not just, I'm not talking about someone walking backwards and then going out the door instead of walking forward and going in the door. I mean, things like smoke dissipates. But like that, someone walking backward and going out the door, someone could do that if they wanted to. It's not inherently backward in time. But if you see a burning thing and the smoke spreads, you'll never see in nature a cloud of smoke that concentrates into something. Okay. That's the statistical, that's to do with entropy, and there's a statistical explanation for that, okay? So that's what the arrow of time comes from. It comes from a statistical thing where even though the laws are reversible, if the state that something's in is very special, like let's say a very ordered state, you have a bunch of dominoes and they're each standing on a table and just right? So that, okay. And then someone moves the table, they might fall.
Right.
And they might fall this way, that way. There's a million ways they could fall, but there was only one way they could stand up just right, or a lot fewer ways. So you can jiggle the table. They're not going to pop up into exactly their initial configuration because that was so special. They'll move into any of a zillion other configurations. So that's kind of what the arrow of time is. But I was wondering psychologically, how does that work? Why is it that we remember, given that the laws are reversible, why is it that we remember the past and we don't remember the future? Okay.
Yeah.
And somehow you would think that might be connected to the smoke spreading, but how does that work? So I asked Stephen about that. And he told me, so this is the we had a couple interactions about physics questions, but I told him I was interested in that. And he says, I wrote a paper on that in 1985 or something.
Oh, Jesus.
So I dig up that paper, but in typical Stephen fashion, he was confusing having said something with having proved it.
Oh my God.
So I go back to look at that paper. He indeed says, he says something about that, but he doesn't really give any details or show how it works. So I'm really back to square one. And eventually Todd Brunn, a friend of mine that I do a lot of physics with, and I wrote a paper on that, published a paper explaining that. It's called, I think it's called Why We Remember, I think the paper is called Why We Remember the Past and Not the Future. Anyway, that was a time that I at least talked to Stephen about that problem, but I didn't work on it directly with him.
Yeah. Well, it's fantastic. Remember the Future. It sounds like a Led Zeppelin album cover title. Here's one from a really interesting question from Amira Mansour, who she says what you just said, the quote, "We changed our mind," close quote, comment really is why physics feels so out of reach for so many. How difficult is it to take what may be an evolving theory or developing findings from scientific research and quote, translate, close quote, it into something for interested non-experts?
Okay, well, I think, first of all, that there's a lot of physics that is pretty settled that people can read about and that it's very exciting. I mean, you don't always have to be reading about what people are working about on at the time. So I guess I would say first that, in fact, I would say that most popular science books are about relativity, quantum theory, black holes, aspects of the theories, evolution of the universe that are pretty well agreed upon, not necessarily the cutting edge. There are books on the cutting edge, and that's like a different genre. Now, to explain those to the general audience it isn't really that much different than explaining something that's already settled, as long as that thing that you're writing about isn't changing while you're writing.
While you're writing, yeah.
Now, when that happens, as in this case, it gets difficult, and you have to just do your best to keep up with how it's changing, and you have to make it clear in the book that where the speculation is versus the settled physics, so people don't think, which most books don't do, but we do at the end of the book talk about how this might be confirmed or verified, and what part of it is Stephen's latest theory versus settled theory. So
right, and I must say, folks, that was one of the things that was really helpful as a layperson. Apart from being eminently readable and human, you have very appropriate and nicely placed footnotes that explain just what you read in a way that was very understandable for someone like myself, and very helpful, which is actually, well, I'll tell you what, you guys asking questions. Are you sure you didn't tee this up in advance? These guys are perfect. Catherine Moyd comes up with a lovely follow-up question to Amra's question. I just finished the book and enjoyed the physics as well as the human story. I rest my case. I graduated in physics from Cornell in 1965 and spent my working career at JPL. You indicated that not everything you wrote was completely verified. Here we go. Have there been any major changes since it was published in 2010? I presume you're talking about, would that be the grand design from 2010?
Yeah. Well, there have been some people who've been carrying the theory on further, but the technology, the difficulty with finding support for that theory or differentiating it from other ideas is that we need better technology, in particular, to study the cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang.
Right.
I think the idea is that in studying the very minute details of that, one can find supporting evidence for Stephen's ideas, and it just hasn't gotten there yet. Maybe another 10 years. Sometimes you have to wait a long time. Like, for example, when Stephen was doing black holes in the 60s, people thought we're never going to see one. Then there was a candidate that they were studying that they didn't really get convinced was a black hole until the early 90s. And of course, we didn't have an image of a black hole until just a few years ago. So sometimes these things take a long time.
Well, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know exactly the specifics, but Einstein's theory of general relativity was essentially proven only a few years ago. Is that
Well,
correct?
first of all, we can't prove it, but you know that, Rob. We can't
You know
prove
what I
it.
mean? Well,
I
was
might use that word too, but since we're talking about the specific context,
yes.
I won't say, but the first evidence for that theory that it was correct, or the first observation that confirmed a prediction of
Okay.
Einstein's theory that was different from Newton's theory. It was just about 4 years after the theory was completed. The theory was completed in 1915, and there was a 1919 observation that showed that it was, that confirmed the prediction. Although there are those who question the statistics on those observations, but anyway, that's what that's what happened. And there have been other tests. I mean, the GPS system that everybody uses, not everyone knows this, but it's very interesting because you think of general relativity, which is a theory that applies generally to the theory that you need to use, as opposed to the old theory, Newton's laws. You need to use general relativity in more extreme situations with large masses or very concentrated mass, or the early universe or something like that. But actually, it affects our lives, because you actually need the GPS systems would be wildly inaccurate. They would just be wrong if we didn't know general relativity. General relativity is very important.
Interesting.
The GPS systems that get us all around our maps, our navigation. So that just the fact that when you type in, I want to go to Starbucks, you should walk. But if you're driving, the fact that you get there is thanks to Einstein. So.
And I have to tell you, that's the sort of stuff that I love about what you guys and girls do in your discipline. My grandfather was a physicist and an electrical engineer. And speaking of JPL, I remember in this very house standing with my first generation iPad a few years ago, watching as the Mars rover landed, because they'd already dropped a camera to watch the landing. And if my genius grandfather came back and saw me standing there with a device this thick that didn't heat up, with no cords, no cathode ray tube, no plug, and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm watching the surface of Mars," this is a really authentically learned man who would say, "That's witchcraft, dude." And so I love being aware of, oh my God, I'm holding this device in my hand. I can find a Starbucks in Mongolia. And I love that you pointed that out. By the way, I know we're almost done. And again, thank you very much for this opportunity. But there was something you wrote in the book that I love so much. And obviously it's, I presume, based on other writings. But you said, it turns out that Isaac Newton was an ass. And I love that. I thought, oh my God, how do we know that?
Oh, we know a lot about Newton. There's a lot of people who've written even in the time about him. We have his papers, his books. He was actually a hoarder. He could have been on one of these reality shows.
Oh my God!
He ever wrote. He kept grocery lists. Every grocery list that he ever wrote. There's boxes and boxes and boxes of his work, his writing, letters. Yeah. We know a lot about Newton.
Well, that was one of the things that made me laugh out loud, because you wrote, well, and Newton's an ass. I just love that people go back, whatever. Isaac, shut your mouth. Equal and opposite reaction, schmaction, blah, blah, blah. But it was, anyway, I know that I think we're pretty much done.
Well, thanks. I think you should take us out on the song, Rob.
Oh, great. I'll tell you what, here we go. These are the countries that have come up since that first song was written. Here we go. Montenegro and Bosnia-Herzegovina. The Soviet Union is gone. South Africa, Georgia, Moldova, Latvia, Belarus, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, hey, Kazakhstan, hey, then there's Tajikistan too, hey, Turkmenistan, woo, Kurdistan, Armenia, Congo, Palau, Lithuania, Serbia, Kosovo, US Samoa, the Balkans, Brunei, Macau and Crimea, then Eritrea, Ukraine and Estonia, here's Macedonia, New Caledonia, Eastern Slavonia, Ivory Coast and Cape Verde, Andorra, the Solomon Islands, Dubai. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
folks.
much, Rob and Leonard. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Please be sure to pick up a copy of Leonard's book, and we hope to see you again very soon. Thanks so much, Rob and Leonard.
Oh, it was a
It's been
pleasure. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.